In this video, we're going to cover all the techniques that you need to know to work with digital painting. The first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need some resources to trace. And in this project, what we're going to do is we're going to create a monster, place it into a scene, and add some fog so it looks creepy and coming out of the mist. So you need to take some time to find high quality images to be able to trace and paint from. What you need is a background, and you need at least two objects to be able to take parts from to create your monster. In my design, I created this strange, nasty tentacle deer, and I cropped out all the pieces and placed them where I wanted them to be. I even cropped out the different parts of the arms of this mantis and built them so that it fits kind of how I want to. Notice how they're very poorly cropped out. That's because it doesn't really matter at this moment. We just need it close enough so that we can see what we're going to trace and then what we're going to paint in. So again, all you need is you need a background, and then you need the pieces of the deers. So my background is very simple, but I took a little bit of time cropping out the person in the center as well as the people in the background because I want it to feel really eerie. After you do that, then you start adding in your other resources. You only have about 2 weeks to work on this, and you have to digitally paint over stuff. So try not to get too ambitious, but I like giving myself challenges. So I made it from a lot of things, but you only need 2 different parts. So think of what your creature is, and then changing at least one of its body parts. From there, what you're going to want to do is I placed everything into different folders so I can very simply work. You're going to create a new layer, and you're going to name that contour. I'm going to lock all my other layers so that I don't accidentally click on them or paint them. And I'm going to focus on my contour layer. Now, what a contour is. A contour is the barrier between two objects. It's often what people think of the outline. And so really, we're going to be creating an outline drawing. But we're going to be creating a slightly more complex outline drawing than just the outline of the creature. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to use the brush tool. Choose your brush tool and then change it to something that works for you. For me, I like using slightly soft edge brushes. I turn the hardness, since it's going to be an outline, I'm going to turn it up a little bit, and I'm going to make the brush really small. Not too terribly small, but small enough that I can see it. I'm going to have my opacity at 100%, and I'm going to change my color to something that I'm not going to mistake for whatever's happening. So that is an arbitrary color. An arbitrary color is a color that has nothing to do with the stuff in the background. And I think this really bright blue is going to stand out really well. There's a couple ways that you can change your brush size. If you use the bracket keys, you can make that larger or smaller. Another way is if you hold Control and Option or Control and Alt if you're on a PC, and then click and drag left and right or up and down, that can change different properties of the brush really quickly if you like getting more proficient with your tools. I'm going to make this small enough that I can still see the detail, but large enough that I'll be able to see it while I'm working. So what you're going to do is on your whole thing, you are going to start tracing stuff. So trace the outline, and I want to say that that's still too big. So you can see I'm tracing the outline of the deer's horn. I'm also going to trace any different changes in texture or value. Value is my shadows and highlights. So let's zoom in here a little bit more. you can see that I have traced where my highlights are, as well as any textural changes. That way, when I start to fill this in, we're going to think of this as a coloring book, I'll be able to see very clearly where I'm going to color in different colors. So take your time, and you can already see that I'm losing a little bit of detail on this, but that's okay. You want this close enough. But if I chose a low quality image, an image that has very high pixelization, then what's going to happen is I'll have less information for me to trace. It'll be much more harder for me to tell what is going on. So try to get as much detail as you possibly can so that you know where different color changes and different texture changes happen. Don't just sketch. Remember, we're creating a blueprint. We're creating an outline. So I'm going to speed up the video so that you don't have to watch me go step by step. And so there we have our entire monster, which is the only thing that you're required to paint, filled in with its contour drawings. And I have contoured every change of color, as well as every highlight and every shadow. I have kind of merged together a couple sections so it looks like one whole creature. So that if I wanted to turn off, which I will eventually, turn off all the strange bits that I built the monster out of, we would have just the deer. And I am going to turn off the other things that are distracting so that you all can see. So you can see that I have drawn in this terrible and nasty creature, and that I have kind of a blueprint. It's just a coloring book now that I can just fill in colors. So that I have this strange octopus face. I've got all my furry bits that start to transition down into these really nasty mantis claws. So you will create your own nasty creature like this. After you have created your contour drawing, what you're going to need to do is color block. Color blocking is filling in broad areas of color at a time. It's not any of the blending yet, so don't worry about blending until later. So I'm going to color block in things so that it's easy for me to see where things go. And when I turn off the contour drawing, it'll look nice. It'll look like a big blocky version of colors. What you're going to do is switch back and forth between the eyedropper tool and the brush tool. I'm going to turn my monster pieces back on every once in a while, and then I'll turn them off. And I probably should have put them into their own folder, so it'd be easier for me to turn on and off. There we go. So now I have my monster folder, and I can turn off all the layers of everything that exists in the monster all at once when I just turn off the visibility on the layer or on the folder. So when I flip that folder on and off, you can see that everything goes on, or that I can see everything and everything goes away. So I can pick colors from there and then paint them into their sections. So what I'm going to do is I need a new layer now. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to move it in between the contour drawing and my original resource of my monster, and I'm going to rename this color. I'm going to lock my contour right now so that I don't accidentally draw on that, and I have everything else locked, so that's super easy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in my creature according to the colors that are there. Looks like I forgot a couple on the face, so I might have to recontour where it's necessary. And every once in a while I can turn off the contour if I'm confused at what's happening. So you're going to switch to the eyedropper tool, which looks like a little eyedropper. And what that does is it changes the colors in my color palette according to whatever I eyedrop. So if I wanted to start working on the brown of the hair, I would just click there and it'd pick up brown. Or if I wanted to switch over to the darker brown, I would click there and it would switch to a darker brown. And so I'm going to use that to color block in areas. I know there's going to be lots and lots and lots of details, but try to simplify it for now. Be easy on yourself. It's your first time. If you want to change colors, like I think I might want to do, I want to make a transition of this orange octopus kind of more on the face too, and make some more brown hairs onto there, you can do that. Or you can choose colors off of a different creature or a different color to play around. But for simplicity wise, you might want to just keep it to the colors that are naturally there. So I'm going to use my eyedropper tool, and that's quick button I, and then I'll switch over to my brush tool and I'll start filling in things. You can size up your brush really quickly, and you can start using different brushes if you want. In the layers palette, there are other brush types in there. Under the brush settings, you can see that I can set different brushes. So if I want a more jagged brush, or if I want a brush with a little bit of texture, I can do that, as well as like change the spacing on it to make it a little bit more random. It's up to you on how you want your brush to work. I like these jagged ones, but go ahead and start filling in your sections. Every once in a while, check your drawings, turn your contours off, turn your original thing, and start seeing how it's coming out. There's going to be a lot of little spaces, so near the end, you're going to need to turn off your contour drawing so that you can fill those off, and turn off your original design so that you can see what areas are missing and still need to be filled in. But eventually, you'll get the whole thing filled out. So that part was color blocking, going through and filling in each of the blueprints of my contour with the colors that needed to be. You saw every once in a while that I turned off my background and sometimes turned off my contours and made sure that I filled in every little spot so that there's no little strange gaps. I even blended in between two of the different pieces, making sure that the tentacles start to make sense and that the claws make sense. The next part on your creature is to blend it. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on your creature. And again, I don't think I want to keep the background on while I paint because I think it's easier to notice how things are going without it. You are going to use the smudging tool and various kinds of smudging tool properties to be able to blend the different sections together. Be careful that you don't over smudge things. You don't want everything to look the same because, like in my fur, I kind of like some of these jagged textures, so I want to keep those. So even if I over blend those, I might go over and redraw some of those jagged fur edges so that it feels natural. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the smudging tool. So I'm going to come over to my toolbar. I'm going to use this little one that looks like a little finger. This finger is my smudging tool, and it works like any other brush. What I can do once I select the smudging tool is I can change the properties. I can change how much it smudges at a time so that when I click and drag, I'm going to move this to, again, my smudging tool, and I'm going to change the smudging strength to like 100. When I push, notice how it smudges the colors from one section over to another. I can also change my strength down to 20, and look at how smoothly it blends. Only a little amount at a time, making the transitions really smooth. That's going to help this feel like a round, realistic creature blending between my different areas. Again, be careful that you don't overblend, and I would not blend out the edges. Otherwise, it won't look like a solid object. It'll start turning into some sort of foggy ghost thing, which might be cool in some scenarios, but not really good for my deer monster. Because it's a brush, I can change what kind of brush it is. So if I want really soft brushing, I might change to one that has only very small speckles. That won't have a lot of push strength to it, so that when I smudge, notice how smooth everything is. It does not push that strong. There's a lot of different ways that we can do things, and you can change what the brush does. Right now I have it set on scatter, so it does random things, and it has some other possibilities. I wouldn't go with a hard edge brush because I don't think that works very well. I would go for one of these fuzzy ones, or at least a soft edge brush. In the preset brushes, there's a lot of possible brushes that you can use. The wet media brushes have really nice brushes for smudging. Notice that in the top corner, they have a symbol saying it's the brush tool, or this one here has a smudge tool. So this one can be a very good one. You can see how crazy it brushes right now, but that's because it's at 90% strength. So if I drop it down to like 18 and brush, that's a little bit better. And maybe I need to make my brush smaller so I can do 18% strength in a small area. A lot better. So be careful that you don't undo all your progress. Sometimes it's a good idea that if you're not quite sure, you just create a duplicate of your layer. But now I'm going to speed up the video while I smooth out sections and add any finishing details of doing small things like hairs or things like that. So now I've blended all my sections together so that it feels smooth, but also jagged where I need it to feel. Another trick on creating selections: when you have your layers palette open, if you hold Command and click on the layer icon, so not on the layer, but the layer icon, notice how it's made a selection that exists only on whatever exists on that layer. That can be very helpful if I want to make sure that every color that I change only happens on this layer. Now I'm going to pull up my background because I think the colors and shadows in the background should always match the colors and shadows that are on my creature or whatever I add to it. So a little trick is to find something dark in the scene. Try to find the dark average color. And and it's kind of this like greenish black over in the bottom part. Now I'm going to create a large brush. I'm going to lower the opacity, and I like using just a general soft brush for this part. And I'm going to make the brush really large. So it's large, but it only has, let's see, let's drop this down to like 10%. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly brush over the lower parts of my creature, and that'll make it a little bit darker. That'll make it more dynamic, a little bit more scary. Same, I can get rid of the highlights from this area, and it's kind of like this light cloud. And I can start putting the highlight in a little bit. You want to be very careful with this because you can go a little bit far. But notice how it started to make it seem like it belongs in this scene. The same colors exist throughout the whole thing. But that's something that you can do, and you can do a little bit extra. But creating selections can make it very easy to paint it in. So I deselected, and I built my scene back. Next that you'll want to do, something that'll help your object feel like it exists in the scene, is you're going to want to create shadows. Creating cast shadows is the shadow that's under the object, and you want to look at where the light is in your scene. In this scene, you can kind of see that I'm going to choose an obnoxious kind of color, but light in the scene is coming from the top up here. And it's going to hit our object, and that's where it's going to block any light. But as it passes through and past, it's going to create my shadows on it's going to hit the ground. And so wherever it's blocked is where that shadow is going to be. But that's because the light is coming from the top. If it was coming from the side or some other place, it'll create a different sort of shadow. So always look and see where are the lights and where are the shadows in your scene. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to name that Monster Shadow. I'm going to paint in a shadow underneath the monster. Before I do that, I'm going to come up to the blending mode. And I'm going to change the blending mode to either darken or multiply. Try out different things to see what works best for you. I'm going to look at my scene, and I am going to color pick, again, something dark in my scene, just so I'm using those same natural shadows. I'm going to move over to a brush, and on my shadow layer, I am going to start creating a shadow. Now, right now, it's too dark and too hard, but that's okay because this is just a practice one. I'm going to make sure that it's underneath my monster, and the edges are a little bit too sharp, so I might need to erase them just a bit. So maybe I get down to a soft eraser, and I'll play around with this, bring the hardness down, have the opacity down some, and I can soften up the edges. So it has that nice diffused shadow look. Wherever you're putting down your shadow, make sure that your shadow either curves or is flat on whatever surface it belongs on. So I am making sure that this lays flat on the flat ground, and I am reducing down the opacity so I can give it that nice soft feathered edge. The closer an object is to the ground, the more it will be nice and dark. In my layers, I'm going to reduce my opacity a little bit, so that I can give it a sense of being transparent. Depending how harsh or how dark your light source is, you might want to change that. And any other objects that I add to my scene, I'll probably want to make a shadow for them too. This person needs a shadow, so I'm going to add a shadow, put it under there, and I'll create a name. So make sure that you're being smart, that you're creating names for everything that needs names, that you're changing the blending mode to whatever works for it. And it's already pretty dark in that section, so I think I can darken this up just a little bit more. Remember, blues feel a little bit more like shadows than other objects, but it always depends on your scene. I'm going to use my smudge tool, and I'm going to smudge the edges, and I can use my eraser to clean up things as well. So now both my person and my monster have shadows. The very last trick that I want you to do is I want you to add mist here to your scene. The mist will give it a sense of perspective, and it'll also make it a little bit fun. So I'm going to create a new layer on the top. I'm going to label it mist or fog or something like that. What you're going to do is you're going to build your own custom brush and get used to building brushes. So I'm going to change to my brush tool. I'm going to change my color to kind of a very, very, very light blue. Almost into the white section, but a little bit of blue will give it that mist feel. Depending on your scene, you might change that. There's kind of a purple vibe that's happening in here, so I might change it to kind of purple, but maybe I'll do the adjustments later. I'm going to come to my brush, and I have downloaded some fog brushes, but you don't have to. What I want you to do is I want you to get something that has like a speckled sort of design. So this one, we can kind of see the brush is speckled. And I want you to change the spacing so it's more spaced out. That already almost looks like fog. Last thing that's helpful to do is turn on scattering if you can. Scattering will allow the brush to jump around different parts while I'm making a line. Bring the opacity down really low, and then make your brush really large. From there, you can start layering up and creating these like clouds. Work lightly, and you can lower your opacity a little bit, or just build up the layers very smoothly and very lightly. I like keeping the opacity kind of high and just worrying about what's in my scene. Feel free to change the brush when you need to. Or you can do the same thing by creating the eraser, and then you can get that same sort of brush and alter it in there by changing the spacing, changing the scattering, or other dynamics like that. And now I can erase the shadows, and it'll still give it that rough fog texture. Or erase the fog, and it'll give it that rough fog texture in the same way that I'm adding rough fog texture. So I'm adding some fog all throughout this scene. And try not to get it too white, but give it some character. I'm using this to dull down aspects of my background so that I don't notice the background and I can focus on my creature. And there we go. I've created this very strange monster creeping out of the mist. If you want to add any last adjustments, like changing the colors of things with image adjustment, or altering things further by repainting over details, feel free to do so. But again, this is an assignment that should take you 2 weeks to do. So try to pace yourself. You can already see how crazy long and difficult it was for me to add all the different tentacles. So do yourself a favor, choose a couple easy things, something that you can achieve for right now. And then eventually go crazy.